we don't know uh, whether negotiations would work or not. It's true. Um, I personally believe they would because I know a lot of the Russian leaders over a long period, and I believe that there is absolutely a way to negotiate, and that the central question is NATO enlargement, and that's the question the US has never accepted even discussing. But let me say the following. Suppose we negotiated something and that it was satisfactory, but then Russia violated it, which is possible. Then we would be in no worse situation than we are right now, but we would at least have the whole world know that we went the extra mile to try to find peace and the other side violated it. And that, to my mind, is the right approach.
Yeah.
The right approach is to try for peace. And if it fails, you end up in war. But if you say there's no one to negotiate with, then you're surely in war. So I want to try the exit ramp, not guaranteeing, because nothing in life is a guarantee, not guaranteeing it would work, but believing that it would. I have lots of reasons to believe that it would. Russia is not a sole actor by itself. China is a very important actor in this. China actually would like a peace agreement. China would like to insist on a peace agreement. India would like a peace agreement. They don't want a peace agreement in which NATO enlarges because the US is targeting China too. But they want a peace agreement that is satisfactory. And so there are many ways to enforce a peace agreement beyond just a piece of paper. There are many interests at stake. And by the way, the Russians honor agreements at times. We do too sometimes. We break them a lot also. The Ukrainians broke agreements. They absolutely would not implement the Minsk agreements. So the Russians say, look, how can we negotiate? You lie to us, you cheat. Britain, France and Germany were supposed to be the guarantors of the Minsk II agreement. When the Ukrainians say, we don't like this agreement, then France and Germany remain silent because they're on the Western side. So there is a lot of deceit, but it's not just Putin. And our division of the world into the pure good and the pure evil is phony, and it's phony here as well. So my view is, and I can tell you, all over the world, people basically agree with what I'm saying, which is, yeah, this is a war about NATO enlargement. And if it isn't, we should prove that. We should say, okay, we won't enlarge NATO. Now let's see if you stop the war. If you don't, then it exposes this isn't about NATO enlargement. This is about your empire building. Then you get the whole world on side. But right now, the whole world isn't on side. I'm not on side, but a lot of the rest of the world's not on side because they believe this is a proxy war between the US and Russia.
So in terms of a negotiated settlement and what is really possible, NATO enlargement would sort of have to be the key piece of that.
I think it's the center. There are three issues that were mentioned every time. And remember something really interesting, another one of these mysteries. In mid-March, there was a flurry of statements by Russia, Ukraine, and Turkey, which was mediator, that the two sides had come close to an agreement and that they actually exchanged papers. And I spoke with a very, very senior Russian official about this who described this to me. And actually, the Ukrainians put forward the idea of neutrality. This immediately went to Putin. Putin said, let's draft a peace agreement around this. The Russians did. They put it back to Zelensky, and then Zelensky said, no, that's not what I meant. And the strong rumors, which I believe, are that the United States and UK said to Zelensky, hell no, you want us to back you? We're not backing neutrality. and that this was a complete change, and it was the end of the negotiations. So I think the US has been completely uninterested in the negotiations. That week, Biden flew to a NATO meeting in Brussels and declared this is going to be a long
Kind of look to your left a little bit.
And then he went from
Look out the window to the left.
went from Brussels to Warsaw and said that man can't stay in power. And then a few days later, Lloyd Austin said our goal is to weaken Russia. So I think it's U.S. policy not to have a negotiated solution. I think there was close to a negotiated outcome beforehand. And I watch lots of Russian blogs, and they call for negotiations, which is, if it were Russia's desire not to negotiate, you wouldn't have the Russian bloggers calling for negotiations. I think Russia's idea was we can scare Ukraine into neutrality, if I could put it that way. That was the original idea of the invasion. And I think it was a desperate move, but I think the motivating factor of the move was that the US was heavily arming Ukraine and threatening Russian security, and Russia could not get US attention. This is the basic point. We treat Russia like shit, if you'll excuse me, which is they put forward negotiating demands and we say, no interest. Why should we talk to you? You're a fourth-rate power. You're delusional. We're the superpower. And that, I think, is the basic point. Then we say there's no one to negotiate with after we say we're not negotiating. But if you don't know if there's someone to negotiate with till you negotiate with them. And frankly, we didn't even try. And if we tried and failed, we'd have the whole world on our side immediately.
So you had mentioned that members of Congress haven't made a strong call for diplomatic solutions. And there was a letter in Congress led by Representative Jayapal calling on the Biden administration to make a stronger diplomatic effort toward ending the war. And so why do you think progressive or liberal members of Congress were hesitant to sign that letter, and what can we as grassroots advocates
A little bit more to the
do
left.
to push it in that direction?
Thank you for letting me know about that. I wasn't even aware of Congresswoman Jayapal's letter, so I'm happy that someone has done it. And again, I'm in Europe these weeks, so I may not know all that's happening in the U.S. debate, but I don't hear a word from officialdom of the contrary. And I think partly people who aren't looking too closely easily can accept the official narrative that, that Putin invaded unprovoked and the guy's a madman and we have to defend freedom. It's a good story. It actually has elements of truth to it, but not very many. And it's hugely misleading, but it is an acceptable story. And I think for most Congress people, it's a kind of the default story. I don't think they know. But what is amazing to me is they don't even discuss anything. So I talk to a lot of officials, they don't know the history. Even senior officials in the US government don't know the background and they don't care. And so in Congress, it's much worse. But I do think we could do something, actually. I really do think that if we had an online gathering with the New York delegation, because this is urgent, and said, all of you, come on, let's have a discussion together. This is nuclear war, after all. You can spare an hour. And we actually had a discussion with the New York delegation. I bet it would make a difference. I think they just don't know, frankly. There's a lot to tease apart in this. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of, and the newspapers are so unbelievably, without analytical edge that it's easy to get completely pulled into this. It is kind of the mainstream story. And so I think that this could make a difference, actually. I really do. I gotta hope that it could.
Yeah, thank you. And so I guess a follow-up to that is in advocating for our members of Congress to take steps toward a diplomatic solution, do you think peace activists should demand that the U.S. get out of NATO or take a position of stopping NATO enlargement because the U.S. is using NATO for hegemony?
I think that the peace community should call for negotiations now that can defuse this crisis before nuclear war. I think that that is the absolute most important thing to do. People are scared and should be scared. And by the way, every day when I read someone say, we're not going to be intimidated by this, I say, what the hell do you know? We're all going to be incinerated if you get this wrong. And I know, because I've studied it for 50 years, how close we have come to nuclear war. And given that we are on the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, somebody ought to think a little bit more clearly about this. Maybe our key people in office some of them are too young to remember this, or they haven't studied it, they don't understand it, they don't know how dangerous this is. But I think that the focus should be stop this escalation. We are on the precipice. This is crazy. And there is a way to negotiate an outcome. And the two sides were negotiating in March. Send them back to the negotiating table, but with U.S. support for negotiations. That, to my mind, is the key.
Great, thank you. And I'm just keeping an eye on the time and wondering if we're nearing the end of our time with you, or.
Yeah, I'm sure that I'm late for something, but let's take a couple questions and then we'll finish up.
Sure. So a lot of our members were interested in understanding the effects of the war on climate change and food security. And so I wonder if you could speak to that.
Oh, we have to stop.
Generally.
6 o'clock Pastor, 6:30 Tulsi, and then we're off to.
Okay, I'm finishing.
Yeah, it has to finish by 6.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I have to finish shortly. My wife is telling me, and she's the boss. So, sorry. About the effects of all of this on climate change and
food security.
And food security. Everything is bad about this crisis. There is no silver lining, period, because you cannot address any big challenge in an organized way in the
kind of look to
midst
your left
of
a
war.
little bit.
And so
Look out the window.
immediate effects of all of this, as you know, have been economic destabilization, soaring fertilizer prices, soaring food prices, soaring energy prices, and that's a part of what's happening. But I'd say even a larger part is there's no international cooperative processes on development or climate or anything else as our geopolitical situation darkens. We're hardly speaking to the Chinese. We are, of course, at war with Russia. And institutions like the G20, which are supposed to be working on global challenges like climate change, are dysfunctional right now because they include the two sides to this conflict. And there are many countries in deep hunger crisis right now that get no attention. I know it because they appeal to me in my United Nations context role. I met world leaders at the UN General Assembly a couple of weeks ago, some in absolutely desperate condition. And I spoke to a very senior UN official yesterday who's trying to help on the hunger side, but he can't even get access to senior policymakers right now, even though he's representing Secretary General, because our institutions are not paying attention to any of these things. They're paying attention to the war and to the election.
Great, thank you for that.
Maybe we should stop at this point, but just to say, if you could see a way to getting some of our delegation online, or you'd like me to help with that, but I'd ask you to take the lead, but use my name and so forth. I think this would be a great next step, and really necessary and
A little bit more
a
to the
core
left. Yeah,
democratic
right there.
step, because our congressmen and women owe it to us to talk with us about this. This is dire, and we need to have a conversation. So you could count on me to join in on that.
That's great. Thank you so much. I feel pretty sure we'll take you up on that.
Wonderful.
Thank you for joining us and for being.
Yeah, thanks to everybody. Sorry we didn't have time for all the questions, and I know people had further thoughts and some skepticism on some of it and so forth. It's just a very confused, very difficult, but extraordinarily dangerous situation. So I thank you. The voice of peace is the most important message right now, period. And we absolutely need to pull back from the precipice that we're deliberately climbing towards right now. So thank you very much, and hope that we're together soon.